Welcome to Rambling Dan Rowe's Deep Dive Book Reviews as we take a look into the life and presidency of Volodymyr Zelensky. We're going to use Simon Shuster's biography, The Showman and the War in Ukraine, to kind of get beyond the headlines and uncover what it was like for a man thrust into a role that he never sought, but that he ultimately embraced with surprising tenacity. So get ready for some unexpected insights into his personality, his leadership style, and the complex relationship between Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, it's quite a journey. And we're going to trace his path from a childhood in a rough Soviet town to the world of comedy all the way to the presidency and the crucible of war. And each step of the way, we'll see how these experiences shaped the leader we see today.
So let's start with his roots. Shuster takes us to Kyiv, a town shaped by crime, poverty, and the lingering trauma of World War II and the Holodomor, which was a devastating famine orchestrated by Stalin in the 1930s, the heavy backdrop.
Absolutely. Zelensky's family navigated this environment with a strict upbringing, emphasizing education and hard work. His father was a computer science professor, and he hoped that Zelensky would follow a similar path. But Zelensky was drawn to something else entirely: comedy.
It's interesting how those early experiences, especially growing up in a place where survival often meant navigating complex power dynamics, might have laid the groundwork for his future leadership style.
Yeah, that's a great point. Kyiv wasn't a place that rewarded naivete. It instilled a certain street smarts, a need to read people and situations carefully.
So Zelensky dives into the world of comedy. Shuster describes him as a natural performer, someone who thrives on connecting with audiences. But he also faced pressure, particularly in the Russian entertainment industry. To avoid jokes that might offend powerful figures, it must have been a tricky line to walk.
Yeah, but then comes 2014, and everything changes with Russia's annexation of Crimea. Zelensky, already a star, takes a stand, using his platform to speak out for Ukraine, even though it cost him financially and personally. It's a turning point.
He also starts touring the front lines, entertaining troops and witnessing the conflict's realities firsthand. I imagine these experiences had a profound impact on him.
They certainly did. And it's here that we see the seeds of his political ambitions taking root. People sensing his genuine connection with everyday Ukrainians start telling him he should run for office.
And so the comedian, the showman, finds himself contemplating a role that he never anticipated: the presidency. Shuster describes his initial reluctance, the decision being made almost in secret, before he finally takes the plunge, leveraging his fame and the popularity of his TV show, Servant of the People, where he ironically plays a school teacher who becomes president.
It's an incredible turn of events, almost a case of life imitating art. But imagine the reaction in Western diplomatic circles. They were dealing with a TV president, and there was understandable skepticism about whether he could handle the complexities of governing.
The book describes his inauguration, a mix of euphoria and trepidation. His family's beaming with pride, but you can almost feel the weight of history surrounding him as he takes the oath of office.
And behind the scenes, there was a steep learning curve. He had to learn the ropes of governing, deal with a skeptical political class, and navigate the treacherous waters of international relations, all while grappling with the legacy of corruption and the looming threat of Russia.
And then, of course, there's the Trump and Giuliani saga, which Shuster delves into in detail. Zelensky tries to stay out of the impeachment drama swirling around Ukraine, but it leaves a mark on him. He begins to realize that international politics can be a ruthless game, and trust is a precious commodity on the world stage.
Yeah, that experience definitely colors his worldview. It reinforces his distrust of authority figures and underscores the need for Ukraine to rely on its own strength.
As tensions with Russia escalate, Zelensky finds himself walking a tightrope. Publicly, he downplays the threat of invasion, trying to maintain calm and avoid economic panic. But privately, he's preparing for the worst, stockpiling weapons and readying the military for a conflict he hopes will never come.
It's a fascinating dynamic. On the one hand, he's the calming presence his people need, reassuring them that everything will be all right. But on the other hand, he's staring down a potential invasion, making crucial decisions that could determine the fate of his nation.
And then there's the friction with General Zelensky, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces. Zelensky's pushing for a more aggressive military posture, urging Zelensky to take the threat more seriously, to prepare for a long and brutal war.
But Zelensky, perhaps still clinging to hope, hesitates. It's a clash between two contrasting approaches, two very different personalities. Zelensky, the career soldier, sees the world through the lens of military strategy, while Zelensky, with his background in entertainment and negotiation, is still trying to find a peaceful resolution.
And it's at this critical juncture, with tensions rising and the world watching, that Zelensky attends a security conference in Munich. making a last-ditch effort to rally Western support. He even meets with Kamala Harris. But the book describes the interaction as strained, almost ominous.
Yeah, it's a fascinating glimpse into those final hours before the invasion. You sense a growing frustration on Zelensky's part, this feeling that his warnings aren't being taken seriously. Meanwhile, Russian troops are massing on the border. The intelligence reports are becoming increasingly alarming, and the world is holding its breath.
And then, on February 24th, 2022, the unimaginable happens. Russian forces launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Shuster describes Zelensky's reaction as one of initial disbelief, followed by a wave of shock and the realization that the world he knew was crumbling around him.
It's hard to grasp the magnitude of that moment, to go from leading a relatively young democracy to facing an existential threat from a nuclear-armed superpower. The pressure must have been immense.
Yeah. The book paints a vivid picture of the chaos that ensues. Frantic phone calls, offers to evacuate, Zelensky's staff being armed with whatever weapons they can find. It's a scene straight out of a thriller, but with real-world consequences.
And amidst all this, there's this constant fear of Russian saboteurs, these shadowy figures lurking in the capital, trying to sow panic and disrupt the government's response. One incident Shuster describes as particularly chilling. The Ministry of Defense headquarters is hit by gunfire, shattering windows and sending everyone diving for cover. It turns out to be a false alarm, but it underscores the level of tension and paranoia gripping Kyiv in those early hours.
There's also that story of Denis Monastyrsky, the interior minister, recording farewell messages to his family just in case he doesn't make it. It really brings home the gravity of the situation they were facing.
Yes, it does. And amidst the chaos, the fear, the uncertainty, something remarkable happens. Zelensky doesn't flee. He doesn't break down. Instead, he steps into a role he never envisioned, a role that will define his legacy. Wartime leader.
It's almost as if in that moment of crisis, all of his experiences, his childhood in Kryvyi Rih, his years honing his craft as a comedian, his time on the campaign trail, all converge to prepare him for this moment.
You're right. It's almost as if those experiences provided him with the resilience, the quick wit, and the ability to connect with people on a deep emotional level, all qualities that would prove crucial in the days and weeks to come.
Shuster talks about how Zelensky immediately grasps the importance of winning the information war. He leverages his understanding of media, particularly social media, to bypass traditional channels and speak directly to global audiences. Those early videos he releases, filmed on his phone in the streets of Kyiv, are raw, emotional, and incredibly effective.
It's a masterclass in communication. He's not just informing people about what's happening, he's inviting them into the experience, making them feel the fear, the anger, the determination of the Ukrainian people. It's a stark contrast to the stilted propaganda coming out of Moscow.
And he's not afraid to challenge Western leaders, to call out their hypocrisy, to demand more than just words of support. That speech he gives to the U.S. Congress invoking Pearl Harbor in 9/11 is a bold move, a masterstroke of rhetoric.
He understands that in order to rally international support, he needs to frame the conflict in terms that resonate with Western audiences. He's not just fighting for Ukraine, he's fighting for democracy, for freedom, for the values that the West supposedly holds dear.
Meanwhile, on the ground, the situation is dire. Russian forces are advancing on multiple fronts. Kyiv is under constant threat of bombardment, and the world is bracing for the fall of the Ukrainian capital. Zelensky is under immense pressure to negotiate with Putin, to make concessions, to cede territory in exchange for peace.
But he also knows that giving in to Putin's demands would embolden the Russian leader, that it would reward aggression and set a dangerous precedent for future conflicts. It's a delicate balancing act, a tightrope walk between diplomacy and defiance.
And the relationship with General Zelensky becomes even more complex. Zelensky focused on the military realities, his urging Zelensky to prepare for a long war, to request more advanced weaponry from Western allies, to adopt a more aggressive strategy.
But Zelensky, perhaps still clinging to hope for a negotiated settlement, is hesitant. He's wary of provoking Russia further.
And all of this is happening while Zelensky is living in a bunker, separated from his family, working around the clock, managing the crisis, rallying his people, pleading for international support. The pressure must have been unimaginable.
It's a testament to his resilience, his ability to compartmentalize, to focus on the task at hand despite the personal sacrifices and the immense weight of responsibility. You can see glimpses of his exhaustion, his frustration in the book. But he never wavers in his commitment to his country, to his people.
And as the war drags on, it becomes clear that Putin miscalculated. He underestimated the resolve of the Ukrainian people, the strength of their resistance, and the effectiveness of Zelensky's leadership.
Yeah, the initial Russian blitzkrieg falters. The Ukrainians, armed with Western weapons and fueled by a fierce determination to defend their homeland, inflict heavy losses on the invading forces. The world watches in awe as David takes on Goliath. And against all odds, David begins to gain the upper hand.
But the war is far from over. The conflict enters a new phase, a brutal war of attrition, with both sides digging in, preparing for a long and bloody struggle. Just briefly, we want to say thank you for listening to Rambling Dan Rowe's Deep Dive Book Reviews. Please remember to like and subscribe to support our channel. Thank you. We left off with the war entering this brutal phase of attrition, with Zelensky facing this immense challenge of leading a nation under siege. The early days of the invasion were about survival, about rallying the world to Ukraine's cause. But as the conflict dragged on, Zelensky had to adapt his approach, shifting from crisis management to long-term strategy.
Right, and this is where his deep understanding of communication and narrative come into play once again. He realizes that to maintain international support, to counter Russian propaganda, and to keep up morale at home, Ukraine needs to do more than just resist. They need to demonstrate that they can win.
And that means taking the fight to the Russians. Shuster describes how General Zelensky becomes increasingly vocal in advocating for a more aggressive military posture, pushing for counteroffensives, utilizing the advanced weaponry that's finally arriving from Western allies.
Yeah, it's a shift in mindset, from a defensive posture to a more offensive one. And it's not without risks. Zelensky argues that a decisive counteroffensive could turn the tide of the war, but it also carries the potential for heavy losses and could escalate the conflict in unpredictable ways.
Zelensky, however, is still cautious. He's walking a tightrope, balancing the demands of the military with the need to maintain international support and avoid provoking Russia. Shuster details a particularly tense moment, where Zelensky overrules Zelensky, refusing to authorize a counteroffensive that the general believed could be a game changer.
It's a fascinating glimpse into Zelensky's decision-making process. He's weighing the potential military gains against the political risks, the potential loss of life, the possibility of widening the conflict. It's a heavy burden to bear, and ultimately, he chooses caution over aggression.
But as the war grinds on, and the atrocities committed by Russian forces come to light, Zelensky becomes more assertive in his demands for Western support. He knows that Ukraine needs more than just words of solidarity. They need heavy weaponry, ammunition, intelligence, everything they can get to push back the invader.
And he doesn't hesitate to call out Western hypocrisy, challenging leaders to live up to their promises and provide Ukraine with the tools they need to defend themselves. Remember that speech he gave to the German Bundestag, where he accused them of prioritizing economic interests over Ukrainian lives? It was a blistering critique and had a real impact.
He also continues to masterfully leverage social media, using it to connect with global audiences, to humanize the conflict, to showcase Ukrainian resilience. Those videos he posts, the interviews he gives, the speeches he delivers, they all contribute to building a narrative of Ukrainian defiance, of a nation fighting for its survival against a brutal aggressor.
It's a brilliant strategy, and it pays off. International support for Ukraine solidifies. And Western nations begin providing more and more military aid, which starts to turn the tide of the war.
And then in the fall of 2022, something remarkable happens. Ukrainian forces launch a stunning counteroffensive, liberating vast swaths of territory that have been occupied by Russia. The world watches in awe as the seemingly invincible Russian military is pushed back, suffering heavy losses and revealing deep flaws in its leadership and strategy.
Yeah, it's a turning point in the war, a testament to the courage and determination of the Ukrainian people, and a validation of Zelensky's leadership. He's shown that he can inspire his people, rally international support, and make strategic decisions that have a real impact on the battlefield.
But the war is far from over. As the conflict enters its second year, new challenges emerge. The economic costs are staggering. The human toll is immense, and the threat of escalation looms large. Zelensky, despite the fatigue and the pressure, remains steadfast in his commitment to victory, to a future where Ukraine is free and independent.
His journey is a testament to the power of leadership, to the importance of communication, and to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. It's a story that's still being written, but it's already had a profound impact on the world, challenging our assumptions about power, about courage, about what it means to lead in the 21st century.
So as we conclude this deep dive into the life and presidency of Volodymyr Zelensky, what stands out to you about his leadership? What lessons can we draw from his experience, from his ability to connect with people, to inspire hope, to navigate a complex and ever-changing world?
Well, here's the final thought to ponder. How has Zelensky's use of media and technology reshaped our understanding of leadership in the digital age? It's a question that goes beyond the battlefield, a question that has implications for anyone who seeks to influence, to persuade, to lead in a world where the lines between information, entertainment, and power are increasingly blurred.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and presidency of Volodymyr Zelensky. It's a story that continues to unfold, a story that reminds us of the complexities of human nature, the unpredictable twists of history, and the enduring power of hope in the face of darkness.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's deep dive. We hope you'll join us again soon. Until then, stay curious and keep reading.